Hippy Dippy Round Table. But actually, it's not the Hippy Dippy Round Table. It's a new format I am experimenting with. This is a card, and what I mean by a card is that means we have two debates tonight that are separated into two separate sections. First, we have a tag team undercard between Denims and Socialism Done Left and CTV and Counterpoints over the issue of gun control. After that, at 9:30, this will end, and we will move on to the main event, which is Demon Mama and Redneck finally finishing their feud, which I am quite excited for. Many other people are excited for. They shot promos for the event. We almost had a press conference, which we're going to have going forward for other events of this stature, where people are going to have little managers, and it's going to be a whole fun shindig. Other than that, let's have everybody introduce themselves first before I go over some of the rules, and then we move on into the tag team debate. We're going to start on the left-hand corner with Denims.
Just a simple introduction, right? I'm Denims.
We'll make it as complicated as possible.
Okay, got it. I'm Denims. I'm obviously pro-gun control here. I talk about politics. I stream every single day. I'm like a sock dem leaning slowly toward more and more towards socialism. And yeah, I think that's about everything.
Wonderful. Next, we're going to move over to Socialism Done Left.
Hey buds, I'm Aiden. I run a channel called Socialism Done Left. I am pretty strictly against the ownership of guns. I think that ideally society would have as few guns as possible. I am a socialist, a progressive. I do streams and also memes. The memes get an ungodly amount of views. The streams do okay. So I'd like to think that generally they're pretty good. That's about it.
Wonderful. Next, we're going to move over to CTV.
Good evening, everybody. I am Critically Thinking Veteran. I am all about getting the government out of your business, and that would include gun control, right? Because the only good gun control is trigger control. So with that being said, looking forward to having the hearty conversation that is before us.
Wonderful. And now I'm going to throw it over to Counterpoints.
Yeah. My name's Connor. I run a small but very quickly growing YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I am very much interested in the balance of power between the civilian population and the federal government. And therefore, I'm really interested to hear some arguments about why civilian ownership of firearms should be completely banned. And I'll just leave the remainder of the memes for the actual show.
Okay. Now, let me go over some of the rules. First rule is, of course, nothing TOS. If you do anything TOS, of course, that's instantly kicked from the show and you will not be invited back. Next rule is that the notepad, the famous Dylan Burns TV notepad, will be out of commission for today's debate because there's no need for it. It's a tag team. There's only 4 people. If you actually need to raise your hand when there's only 4 people in a room, then discourse is dead and we should give up on democracy. Next, do not at anybody else you are talking to in the Twitch chat. That rule is still the same. When it comes to the banned words, they are still in effect because, again, we are having a debate about gun control, not about whether it's okay for you to call this person in a debate the B word or the C word or the R word. Those are the 3 banned words so far, and the rest of the banned words are TOS words. Again, it's not banned because I want to police your niceness. I will not police your niceness in this debate. I am simply doing it because I'd rather not have a debate about words and whether it was nice or bad that you called somebody a word. I'd rather have a debate around gun control. So, is there anything that I'm leaving out from usual, or is there anything that I need to cover or expand on?
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay, wonderful. Then this can start with both sides getting, I will say each person's going to get about a minute to introduce their segment. It's kind of loose a minute since there's less people here. You have more time to speak generally, so you can just introduce what you think about the topic. I'm going to start with the right wing with Counterpoints.
Yeah, so this all boils down to a fundamental argument and understanding about power and how it should be distributed in society. So violence, you know, the state often is depicted as having a monopoly on violence. In American society, it does not. The reason why it doesn't is because our founding fathers basically articulated a concept that people who are ruled by a government have the ability and right to abolish their own government when it becomes tyrannical. I don't think the founding fathers are idiots. I don't think they're a whole bunch of dumb, old, fogey, white slave owner dipshits that we should completely ignore. I think they studied history. I think they studied republicanism. I think they studied balance of power and how societies get out of whack. I think we pay a utilitarian cost in lives every single year in the result of gun deaths inside the United States, but that is a price, in my estimation, worth paying in order to avoid authoritarian slaughter. And I will quickly remind you before we get off of here that we have people who are using the term socialist, which I am not scared of personally, but at the same time, a lot of people who call themselves socialists and a lot of people who call themselves fascists in the 20th century used unilateral power inside their societies to commit mass slaughter. And I am wary of that imbalance of power that leads to authoritarian slaughter.
Okay, I will ask, Counter, are you sure you're using the mic in front of you?
No, I'm not. Should it be closer? Should it be further? Should I plug
I
it
cannot.
in?
You are not using that mic.
Okay, I will fix it.
Wonderful. We're gonna throw it over to CTV.
All right, so what I'm going to do with this little opening statement is read a paragraph from a book. I'm not going to tell you what book, but if you're interested later, feel free to ask. Without this, he said, touching the blade, there is nothing. No justice, no civilization, no society, no community, no peace. Without the sword, there is nothing. Before the sword, he said, there is no right, no wrong, only fact, a world of what is and what is not, rather than a world of what should be and should not be. There is no justice until the sword creates it, establishes it, guarantees it, gives it substance and significance. He lifted the weapon, wielding the heavy metal blade as though it were a straw. First the sword, he said, then government, then law, then justice. This is exactly why the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, because the government is the people, and the people are the government.
Gonna throw it over now to Socialism Done Left. Can I take a swing at what that was? Was that
I gave you a hint. The book was published in 1967.
is it The Hobbit?
No.
Okay, it's Socialism Done Left.
Was it Mao?
No. Was it Mao?
Sure. So the basic argument about guns to me is, one, they provide enormous negative outcomes. We're talking about higher suicide, higher homicide, higher gun accidents. All totals out to about $176 billion per year, if you want to put it in monetary costs. In terms of like numbers of people dying, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people are killed in addition to what normal suicide and homicide would be. Pretty hefty cost if we're talking about utilitarian calculus. So what do they provide on the positive side? Basically, we have no evidence that they lead to increased safety. We have no evidence that they lead to increased resistance to tyranny. So we're only talking about stuff like hunting or personal enjoyment. I do not think that entertainment or personal enjoyment can outweigh the lives of thousands and basically an enormous economic drag, which in turn leads to long-term suffering. So in short, the argument is big negatives, few positives.
Okay, next we're gonna go to Denims.
So I'm going to bridge the gap over to, let's say, removing guns. I'm in favor of, at least for the current foreseeable future, just increasing gun control in America. I think the goal of trying to remove guns in America is a far-fetched one that is probably not going to happen anytime soon, and that thinking about it is sort of like a pipe dream in a way. I think much more salient, and I think that there are also some arguments that you could make for owning guns in America, very, very specific ones, which I'm sure we can go over in the actual discussion. But I will say the evidence that shows, there's a lot of evidence that shows removing certain things from how we buy guns, adding certain procedures to how we buy guns, drastically reduces the lives that we lose to guns in a way that for responsible gun owners, basically doesn't impact at all. Those people are not impacted at all. And for people who are not responsible gun owners, it is strongly impacted. And that we can see in a utilitarian perspective, we solve all of the benefits of people who want to own guns and feel like they should own guns, while also completely reducing just like lives that are being lost for absolutely no reason.
Okay, now the floor is open. You may engage freely. Good luck, and good riddance.
Who wants to start?
Who wants to start? That's the question.
I can start. So I would like to see. I want to address what's correct and what's incorrect. I don't want to be partisan in my arguments. I don't want to say, "Oh, you're on one side, I'm on one side. You can go fuck yourself." I'm not going to acknowledge anything that you said. So let's just acknowledge something really quick. I would like to see the evidence based for higher suicides. I did a study back in like 2016, 2017, where I compared suicide between Western Europe and the United States of America. The numbers were pretty much a wash. I'm pretty sure it was pretty freaking close. So I would like to see some statistics on that. However, I will concede reality in that we have approximately a triple or double the homicide rate of any other developed country, because most developed countries do have pretty strict gun control. So we'll concede that. We fundamentally disagree on whether or not firearms provide some kind of check on tyranny. And to say that the only purpose that guns serve is hunting or personal enjoyment is a cultural rift between the two of us. We do not agree on this. The Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's not about personal enjoyment. It's not about me going to the range and plinking a whole bunch of rounds at some paper targets. It's literally about killing politicians, and that's not TOS, because I'm not advocating for this. I'm talking about the balance of power between the civilian population and the government. So what I would like to, in order to be charitable and nuanced, I would like to ask Denims specifically, what gun control measures do you want specifically? What gun control measures you cited drastically reduce the lives lost to guns? And then I would also like to ask SocialismDoneLeft, it seems like you're more interested in like a European style gun control measure where only the rich have guns. I would like your
like
specific policy prescriptions.
Brief question, Dylan, is there a chat for which all this stuff could be posted, or just pick someone?
You can put it in the chat, which you share the
that group
Discord,
chat, right?
or if you want to put directly into Twitch chat, that's fine too. But if you put it into Discord, I'll put it in Twitch chat for you.
Okay, so I have to respond. So the primary gun control measures that I'm talking about, that I've researched, that I know that are good, are increasing wait period time, which we've done in a couple of states. At the minimum, a 24-hour wait period time should be enacted in every single state. We have a lot of stats and information that show that this helps in the states that it is enacted. So I think that there are 10 states. I can't pull them off all on the top of my head. I'm sure I can pull them up, but I know it's like California, Rhode Island, something like that. All of these states have these policies in, and they are proven to actually reduce suicides, because one of the primary problems with suicide by gun is that, well, first of all, only about 85% of people who try and kill themselves with a gun succeed. I think it's 3% of people who try and kill themselves with a gun succeed. So just by removing guns from people who are suicidal, the chance of them actually succeeding in their suicide attempt goes up 80%. That's crazy. That's crazy high. I think there is a stat from a Stanford study that shows that owning a handgun causes an 8 times increased risk of committing suicide in men and a 35 times increase in risk in women. Literally just owning the handgun happens to increase this risk. Obviously, this would be in favor of removing guns altogether, or potentially maybe doing better checks on this, because one of the other problems that happens is that you will have background checks on people, but you actually only federally, I think, or statewide need, I believe, it is 3 business days under federal law is all you need, which is usually not even enough for the completed background check. Usually background checks take a month or something or longer. And you don't get this for the first time gun owner purchaser or whatever. So all you need to do is wait 3 days under federal law after completing certain processes, completing your application, even if you don't have your background check completed. Adding this wait period increases the amount of time for the seller to actually receive the information on the background check of this person. This is primarily with regard to people who have domestic abuse charges, who are getting guns, who should not be getting guns, who very clearly are not going to be using the gun for, or potentially not using the gun for anything that is actually going to help somebody or help protect themselves. On some level, I will say, I I do think that there are, at least if you live in rural America, if your idea is, okay, let's pretend like the
Could
cops
we
are great
try
and
to
perfect.
wrap this up a little bit?
Oh,
Because
yeah,
you've been
sure,
going
sure.
for a little bit.
Sorry, my
Well,
bad.
and I want to contextualize something you said. So, SocialismDoneLeft, you were kind of saying that you wanted to post some stats about like the suicide rate between America and other countries, and I would like to know the percentage difference between those two, like, you know, apples to apples comparison. But I would assume, and I'm kind of asking, that Americans are not 8 times or 35 times more likely to kill themselves than whatever your apples to apples comparison is.
Oh, sure. So if we want to look at I don't usually do just correlational studies. Like what you were talking about before is just look at the suicide rate in Europe, look at the suicide rate in the United States. Oh, there's not a big difference. Ideally, what we want is causal evidence. So like say a policy is enacted and then suicide rate drops. And so I posted 3 studies that examined those. I won't go into too much detail. In short, back when we did is this the Brady handgun? I don't know. There was something relating to the waiting period that's strongly increased during the 90s. After that waiting period enormously increased, suicide decreased by, looks like, around 7%. They say it's causal due to something called synthetic controls. There's another much simpler study which found that when Israel banned its soldiers from taking home their guns, the suicide rate of Israeli soldiers dropped by 40%, and all of that decline was on the weekends when they were prohibited from taking home their guns, suggesting that don't have guns, less suicide. And then the third one, which also uses synthetic controls, is just one looking at Connecticut. And generally it found about 15% lower suicide rates in areas where you needed a permit to purchase a gun than in areas where you did not.
Okay. So I want to hold both of your feet to the fire a little bit, and I'm not trying to be a dick about it. But the advocacy here oftentimes comes down to comparison. So I know you're saying correlative versus causative, these waiting periods are better, all that kind of shit. Okay, so there's some level of nuance in gun control stuff here, but you know, the reason why I would want to compare us to Western Europe, or I would want to compare us to other developed modern societies for per capita suicide, is because if you literally took a population and you had a per capita suicide rate in the United States and you had a per capita suicide rate inside these other developed nations that had aggressive gun control, I would largely agree with you that maybe these measures are good at delaying suicide, or they're good at giving people the ability to have resources. But if the rates end up staying completely the same, apples to apples, then I don't see why giving up this balance of power that I deeply value that you do not. One of your strongest arguments.
Sure. So just to answer on the suicide, before we move to the
doesn't
power
reduce
thing.
Suicides, what are we gaining here?
Before we get to the power thing, on the suicide thing, the reason why I think is really quite simple. There are 2 big numbers that go into the suicide rate. One is how many people try it, and 2 is how many people succeed. And so there's a lot of evidence that guns increase that latter number, and a little bit of evidence that they increase the former number. So mostly what you'd imagine is that some places like Japan might have higher suicide rates than the United States. That's mostly because they have higher attempt rates, even though the success rates are lower. America has a lower attempt rate than do other countries, but its success rate is much higher because people are much more likely to use guns here. And guns have between a 70 and 90% kill rate in suicide.
Okay. Then just to move it to, I'm not trying to box out CTV or anything like that, and I'm not trying to dominate the conversation, but like, it seems like we have beef primarily. So for instance, like I could just concede. Let's just say we get really nuanced, and I just concede all of these arguments. Okay, it'll reduce suicides, it'll reduce suicide effectiveness, it'll reduce homicides, like all that kind of shit. But really, what it comes down to is a fundamental argument about the balance of power between civilians and the federal government. So I would like to see what your perspective on that is.
Wait,
well,
Counter,
something
you
I
say,
did want to say.
You say you have beef? Is that what's in this?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, continue.
I did want to say that, like, in the short term, I hold positions that are, I'm pretty sure, going to be pretty similar to those of Denim. I'm not saying, like, tomorrow we should take your guns. The argument is more that, like, ideally, the ideal society should be one with, like, fewer guns. So in the long term, we should be pursuing productions of guns. But in the short term, that mostly means stuff like background checks. That mostly means stuff like extended waiting periods. The kind of, like, common sense gun control that is extremely popular. So
Well, I got maybe a different line of questioning for everybody, right? So what is your goal like, what's the goal? You say suicide, you mentioned domestic violence, right? So you just don't want people that are willing to do violent things against other people to have the means to be able to carry out these violent actions in a violent way, right? That's what you ultimately want.
And
Right?
also one more category of people who are irresponsible gun owners who leave their guns out somewhere where someone who would do something with that maliciously could do it.
Okay, so now
Put
you
that
just
also add a
argue.
category.
So that one would just be arguing storage, right? So
Storage, or like background check, or like you would have to take some tests and be like, hey, by the way, like you need to make sure your gun is somewhere safe. You understand this is like a 3-hour like DMV style video. Or whatever format, so that people who are gun owners would understand this concept, which I'm sure most of them do. The vast majority of them do.
No, they don't.
Oh,
Yeah, like,
okay.
legitimately, I
mean,
think the most important policy you could do to curb.
I still
like,
hadn't got to my
gun-
question yet.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
I was
Go
I
ahead.
was laying some framework, right? So so you want to be able to stop violent people from doing violent things. So why is it that we look to restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens rather than punishing those that have crossed that violent line, hold their feet to the fire, right? So if you go out and you commit an act, you commit the murder with a gun, right? Why is it that you are not? Why is it that there would be such an opposition to the death penalty when you just took somebody else's life? Why is there opposition there? So it's almost like you want to be able to restrict the rights of the citizens down to the nth degree without actually holding the criminals responsible, and that creates an injustice. And when the people see that, they no longer have respect for the system.
I mean, this isn't like a death penalty debate. I think the opposition to the death
No,
penalty
I get that.
Usually stems from like arguments about whether it's actually a deterrent, like whether it actually makes people stop doing crime. The evidence there is either like it's either a wash or it's against it stopping crime. And two, because it just costs more money. It's just simpler to lock someone away for 60 years, which is a de facto delayed death penalty. So just
can I make my drunk uncle argument here? The death penalty doesn't cost like okay, the death penalty as we institute it costs more, and I understand there's utilitarian arguments against it, rehabilitative arguments, like all that kind of shit. Okay, so just consider all of your nuanced points well received.
It's the legal stuff that costs so much money.
Right. Yeah. It's not the actual cost of overdosing someone on heroin or, death by shooting squad or hanging. It's not anything like that. It's that we take 30 years to kill somebody who murdered 6 people with a claw hammer in 1992.
Sure.
So
then why not just lock them away for life, right? If you're going to take 30 years, if you want to preserve the innocence of civilians, which I think is pretty important, just lock them away for 50. They'll die. It's just a delay.
But you still haven't addressed the issue, right? You're really wanting to control the rights of the people, because let's be honest, right? If you outlaw something, right? Let's just say that right now they decide they want to outlaw guns, right? Guess who's going to be an outlaw on this panel for sure? This guy.
I don't think anyone here wants to outlaw guns.
Well, that's not.
Let me
whether or
ask
not you want to. The reality is.
Just when you're done.
Yeah. So the reality, at least what I see, is that as soon as the conservative side that says that we don't want the federal government making laws with regard to weapons because it only turns into shit, as soon as they concede any ground to say even a background check, well, now it's like, whoa, you gave us this, so what about this? Right? So then it's like you're having to continue to try to backtrack. And that's where I will always be in the position of keep your nose out of my fucking business. This is my house. I can run it myself, and I don't need anybody's help doing it.
And I kind of have a question, because this kind of tags along with that sentiment. You use the term common sense gun control, and I'm actually really happy you did, because often liberals, Democrats, progressives will use common sense gun control as this catch-all term for a suite of policies that are not common sense to me. So oftentimes it's magazine limits, oftentimes it's assault weapons bans, oftentimes it's, those are really the two primary ones that are kind of not common sense to me. So when you say common sense gun control, what do you mean?
Okay,
sure.
I want to quickly. Oh, sorry. I just want to quickly respond to CTV's point. First of all, people who are about to kill themselves with a gun could not give a fuck if there was a death penalty. Like, that's their goal. Their goal is to die. Like, a death penalty is like, oh, cool. Now I get to die more. Like, that's not the preventative measure for like suicides by death. And I think that I don't remember the stat number, but something like 40,000 people or something attempt or something like that. And second of all, people who are like at the point in their life where they're murdering or like what is it called, like a passion crime murdering or whatever, those people are not in the moment either mentally there to know not to murder someone. Like it's not like they're having like a rational set of thoughts that's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't because then I'll get the death penalty. It's like you are at a stage where you are like either super angry or like filled with rage or whatever the fuck, and you're too blinded by your own like emotions in the moment to actually like think about like the repercussion. Also, we currently have like I don't think that like the death sentence versus like a prison for life or something is that's the biggest difference in the world that's really going to deter everybody from murdering. I don't think it is. I think like all of the school shooters that we've had in America, if they knew that they were going to get the death penalty, I don't think that it would have changed their opinion. Like they knew that they were going to get in trouble, they would hand themselves in or like try and kill themselves. Like they don't care about the repercussion. They want current in the moment vengeance. That's my points on those. So you can go ahead.
And
So,
sorry, go ahead. No, please go ahead. I just asked about the common sense gun control stuff.
Yeah, so I wanted to respond to you. So most basically it's Denims, and then the one thing. So I really like permit to purchase a gun. I just like that because then you can have a check to like see. Basically, then you can have a check to ensure that people keep being trained with their guns. And two, tying that to safe purchases, literally like gun safe, not like a safe gun, but like a safe that holds guns.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Because the number one source of guns that criminals obtain is via gun thefts. And so the number one way, if you want to reduce gun crime, is ultimately about reducing the ability of criminals to access civilian guns, either one, by reducing civilian guns in general, or two, by making it harder to get to them.
Do you not understand the hypocrisy in what you just said?
About 500,000 guns are stolen each year.
No, you're not getting it. What you literally just said is that you wanted to be able to stop the criminals by punishing the law-abiding citizens. When is it that the people that are law-abiding citizens are not going to be getting punished because the criminals are doing stupid shit and you hold the criminals accountable? That's what I want.
Here's the thing. We're already holding the criminals accountable, first of all. And second of all, we apply this everywhere else. This is why we deal with TSA fucking waiting lines. Like, I don't want to fucking go through TSA every single. My fucking last name is so fucking Brown. Every single time I check in my bag, I get a fucking notice that says random search. Oh yeah, I'm sure it was a random search. Okay, I don't want to fucking have to deal with like my shit being broken. Okay, I don't want to have to suffer. But there's some fucking brown people that ruined it for the rest of us, so we got to put up with it. Okay, and it's the same thing. There's some fuckers that steal some guns and they kill some people. And now the rest of us have to do all this safety bullshit. It's just the way that it is.
Sorry, CTV, go ahead.
Counter, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry for laughing. Funny.
Oh no, you're fine.
Yeah. So so far I've heard delayed purchasing, safe storage. Mm-hmm. Those are the two that I've heard so far as like policies. And from me, just to get some concession in Denims, I promise I can take some real right-wing takes that'll piss you off real quick. But so let me give you my personal concessions. I'm not speaking for CTV. I'm not speaking for libertarians. I'm not speaking for the entire right. But what exhausts me about our society is we are constantly focused on rights and we are never focused on responsibilities. That is exhausting to me. And so what I would want I'm dictator for a day, fascist Connor Deering takes over society. What I would institute is basically revolvers, lever actions, bolt actions, and pump action shotguns. All these things that have an action that's kind of delayed is the current standard. You walk into the gun store, you pass a background check, they hand it to you, same day, because we've enshrined this into our Constitution. And I think the utilitarian calculus that I value so much, I don't feel like abridging. However, semi-automatics, rifles, pistols, all that kind of stuff, you basically have to do a driver's license test to show your competence. But that driver's license test is open to every person inside the United States of same sound mind and kind of body. I know sound body gets a little edgy because there's people with disabilities who would probably want to use firearms. But this is dictator Connor for a day. But I would much rather have the Swiss model than anything else, where basically guns are a right, but they are a well-established, well-exercised, well-trained right where it's not just a meme that Bubba in his plate carrier goes out into the Georgian woods and plays soldier for a weekend. Literally, people are trained how to use these things safely and responsibly, to a quality that is not military, but so they don't shoot themselves or shoot their kids or let their kids kill themselves, or there's a civic, legal, and safety education that goes along with greater power. I'm not speaking for libertarians or the whole right. This is just me saying that.
Well, gun permits based. Glad
Yeah,
Well,
it's based as fuck.
I have problems with the term permit, because like permit is like the government is just, hey, because we're so nice, we're giving this to
Sure.
you.
Why don't
It's
we
like,
call
no,
it a it's a gun
yeah.
license, okay?
No, that's worse. Like the left is often optically terrible.
So I guess to respond to it, like, I do agree, like that. I think that rights do come with responsibility. So even if we want to maintain a gun-owning society, I do agree that a lot of these reforms are in the right direction, because it's to try and concentrate guns among those who are most capable of using them for good. The basic question is like, how effective are they at using it for good? And so one of the things that CTV brought up is like, hey, what about people wanting to use this to defend themselves? What about, and then you've brought up consistently counterpoints, this idea of defending oneself against tyranny. These are obviously pretty separate points that would require separate empirical analyses to evaluate. Because tyrants are not the same thing as a person on the street, to be clear.
Literally
Tyrants,
not different. The ability for a human being to be able to defend itself, one, from another human being, anything in nature, and from the government that's ruling over them, is all fundamentally the same defense.
Well, the primary problem is that the government can drone strike your house, or roll up,
Which
with a tank
makes
at
it
your
inherent,
house.
and for that reason alone, it makes it inherently hypocritical for the federal government to think that he can tell me what kind of rifle I can have inside my fucking house.
Well, I'm just saying that there is a difference between like another person. Another person is probably not going to drone strike your house or like show up in a tank.
You haven't
you could
seen
probably-
CTV's drones for his tank.
Clearly. But the government obviously has a lot more in their arsenal. There's just like a slight difference. But you can keep going.
No, but you say that, but then like the ultimate weapon that would allow the citizens, if the government became so tyrannical that they needed to be able to acquire such items, is the rifle, right?
Sure,
The
I mean, you
AR-15
see this-
is that weapon to be able to allow somebody to be able to fight back against a government that had become so tyrannical, which is exactly why the people need that. And it's also a hunting weapon, and it's a home defense weapon, which then covers all three things that I just said.
So this is one of the moments when I get to cite one of my favorite studies by Chenoweth and Stefan, 2011. It's the study that found that nonviolent resistance is about 2 to 4 times more effective than is violent resistance to governments. So the idea that your gun is the best way, sure, even when you're looking at like it's just a study of the entire world. It's like a regression analysis. I can send it. It's a fun little read. Only a book. I see that you're making a face. What do you think?
I'm restraining a question. So not trying to be a douche nugget, but oftentimes, like when we're talking about this, we're often talking about the concessions that governments are willing to extend their populace. So that's often what we're talking about. So I'm sure, I hope, when you use the term regressive analysis, I'm assuming that it's controlling for some factors that are involved in this study. But what I'm concerned with is that some of these factors that might reduce the popularity or possibility or efficiency of a peaceful protest is probably an authoritarian government that doesn't give a fuck about slaughtering its own citizens. So
that's sorry.
No, please.
Quick
I
moment.
would like
I need to use the
rebuttal with that.
bathroom, but you've all been diplomatic so far, so I don't see any problems. I'll be right back.
I think we'll be fine.
Hey, fuck you, Denims.
All right, thanks. Okay, I'm gonna do, this is the perfect time since the host is gone, but I'm gonna do exactly what everyone hates, which is the left eating the left. I will say there is only one factor where there is a worthwhile maybe defense, very small, but it's possible that you can't recognize that there is a stat that is not we're not capable of recording it. So which is, if you are a gun owner and you're like a proud gun owner and like you have like signs outside your front door that say like I have a gun, you're probably going to get less people trying to break into your home and commit violent acts against you. So at the very least, it's even if it's not actually protecting you, which we can have a discussion on that, there are numbers of people who are probably less likely to like rob a house or something based on that factor alone, right? Like if you're picking between two houses or some shit, like you're probably gonna go for the one that probably maybe doesn't have a gun or some shit.
And just to cite anecdotal, but hopefully what could be statistical evidence. So oftentimes, I was a former law enforcement officer, and a lot of burglaries would basically happen in what I guess I would call the traditionally black neighborhood. And what would happen is people would be furious that their stuff had been stolen, that they've been broken into, and all that kind of stuff. And they would sign the affidavit saying they're willing to prosecute and all that kind of stuff. And then they find out that it's their neighbor's kid, and they decline to prosecute, and they basically go, like I don't want to put him through that. I don't want to put his family through that. I don't want him to go to jail, all that kind of shit. We had a burglary in a different part of town in which the burglars all escaped with their lives, but they were confronted by a gunman and basically shot at while they were escaping. Nobody was injured. Nobody was killed. But for that area, for a significant portion of time going forward, probably literally a year, burglaries in that neighborhood were nearly non-existent. But the burglaries in the areas where people declined to prosecute and didn't, defend their property continued with reckless abandon. So I'm just trying to back up the deterrence stat. I get it. Deterrence is not sexy. It's not statistically easily to analyze and all that kind of stuff. But there is a factor here. But Socialism Done Left, I would be interested in the regressive variables that you were talking about that might have controlled for tyrannical governments.
Sure. So I don't want to spend the whole stream looking at like a regression table. I posted table 3.3, posted table 3.3 both in chat and in Twitch chat, I guess. And you can read down the left. Basically, the way this works, at the top there's the models. Model 8 is the one that includes almost all the variables. And if you read down the left side, you'll have the names of all the variables they included as controls. And so one of those is where is it? It should be titled autocracy democracy or something along those lines, which is basically it's a measure of how like autocratic versus democratic a government is, used in the widely popular Polity 4 or Polity 5 data set, which people familiar with foreign policy should know probably. And 2, they controlled for when the state violently repressed a mass like movement. And the point is, after controlling all of that, the 9 violent campaigns were significantly more likely to succeed than the violent campaigns were.
So just so I can understand what you're saying properly, are you saying that violent revolutions are less likely to succeed than peaceful reform movements? I'm just trying to understand exactly what you're saying.
So we're usually not talking about, it's not reform per se. It's usually stuff like mass protests. So like, what's his name? Dylan, what's the Belarusian guy?
Alexander Lukashenko.
Yeah, that Alex, right? He's had huge protests against him, and those are very statistically likely to lead to like overthrow. There's other desirable elements of this, like the authors also demonstrate that after a non-violent overthrow, you're something like 5 times more likely to end up in a democracy, which I prefer than a violent overthrow. But basically, the argument is. I'll couch this one last thing. One of the things that the authors found is as their data went on and on through the years, the closer they got to the present day, the more effective nonviolent campaigns were. The closer we got to the past, the more effective violent campaigns were. The argument that I had raised is as the state has gotten more and more powerful, you just can't fight it. It is increasingly getting to a point where violence just isn't going to work. It's not going to cut it. You've got to find some other way to change their mind. The main finding that they found in this study is the more people participate in your movement, the more likelihood you have to force change in the regime, and you're likely to get more people to participate in a nonviolent than a violent campaign because people don't want to die.
Also, we should recognize that like the Constitution was written when everyone had muskets. Like it's a very different fucking or whatever.
Do you realize that there were Gatling guns during that time?
Okay, I'm sure there were, but that
right.
was,
so they
also didn't have, but they also didn't have like tanks. And,
no, they didn't have
nukes
tanks, but they understood
but
the state they had big ass cannons, they had Gatling guns. It's like
the state.
Hold on. I think that it's disingenuous to think that our founders, as smart as they were to frame the Constitution in such a way that they didn't have the ability, having studied Leonardo da Vinci, right, to be able to see where technology might be able to take us into the future. I think it's very, very arrogant, as a matter of fact, to think that these men who were as brilliant as they were would not be able the way that the future might come. Now, the only thing that I've ever been willing to give any type of ground to is the atom bomb. And I think that the splitting of atoms is a pretty big fucking revolutionary idea that they probably would not have been able to see. But beyond that, they would have been able to see everything else because everything else is pretty basic technology.
So it
And
would appear that Gatling guns were not invented till 1861.
But
The
there was
Constitution
there was
not
the
written in
puckle gun.
1861.
There was the puckle gun.
The puckle gun.
Puckle. The puckle.
so there were like prototypes, but I think the
Yeah.
point more broadly is that like mass civilian ownership of advanced weaponry was almost certainly lower in the 1770s than it is today. But I also just I don't think this is a very compelling argument. Whether the founders like were very sound of mind and big brain is somewhat irrelevant to what the truth is. It's 250 years or so later.
Okay, but this is
244, but you
this
know, who's
is-
keeping count?
where this is okay, but this is kind of where I'm unwilling to make bets on your statistical analyses. And the reason why is because you said 2 to 4 times whatever. So that means that there was plenty of failure. And that means that there was plenty of brave people who were part of peaceful movements who went up against authoritarian regimes, and they were thrown in jails and they were executed and they were tortured and they were basically told to fuck off. And
At about 3 times lower rates than were violent people.
at about 3 times lower rates than violent. Oh, okay. So if I peacefully protest, I stand a 33% less chance of being tortured by an authoritarian government.
The numbers don't exactly line up, but basically yes. Let's just say for the point of argument,
it's still not great. So like
sure.
here's
The point here that I'm raising is one of the things that they found is that the biggest thing a government can do to stop a revolution is just violently suppress it. Whether you're violent or not, the government usually wins. The government is really, really strong. Like, unfortunately, the best bet you have to oppose tyranny is not after they've become tyrannical. It's preserving the democratic safeguards that get you closer to that in the first place. And there's little to no evidence that firearms are going to keep that safe.
No, that's
No!
literally what brought the revolution.
No. Dude, we were together for 99% of that, and then we just lost it right at the tail end. What we already have a representative democracy that's kind of evolved into an oligarchy. We already have massively unpopular political figures leading our society. We already have supposedly just survived a fascist coup that only didn't go through because of incompetence. So what is this? What is this concept that like we don't have to worry about this? We just have to safeguard democratic norms, and we just have to use the laws and the republic and our ability to reform and mass protest in order to safeguard liberty. And on top of that, here's my follow-up question to that. What if that fails? And I understand that it's not fun or popular or sexy. Well, maybe it's all of those
And
things.
when it
because people love
fails,
to
whether
LARP
you've
about
got
it.
guns or not, they'll kill you. That's the answer.
Okay, but at the same time, this is the other thing. Let's say that Trump is everything that everybody says he is. Let's say he's a fascist. He's an authoritarian. He hates Mexicans. He wants to use hysterectomies in order to commit genocide. He wants to kick all the Muslims out of the country. He doesn't like Denims. He personally wants to kick Denims out of this fucking country just because of her ethnic background. Okay, why would you volunteer to run into that situation without the ability to resist? Why would you volunteer? Like literally, like,
Sure.
hey, Donald Trump and the government, here's all my guns. I don't want to be able to resist you because you might kill me. That I'm trying not to get emotional about it, but that doesn't
Sure.
feel
So the
very
argument-
principled.
So one of the things, there's another really interesting study that I'll present from, I can if you want, or I can just describe it, from about the 1968 riots and protests surrounding the death of Martin Luther King Jr. And the basic idea is that the study is called, narrative seeding. When protesters use violent means, it makes it easier for the media, the state, the government to paint them as terrorists, as radicals who are burning our cities. BLM is looting and rioting. We need to send the army in. That's much easier to justify when they are actually doing violent actions. But in converse, peaceful protesters generally, in fact, move the politics towards their side by about 2 to 3 percentage points. The media was favorable to those people. There is an impact of bringing a gun and escalating it to violence that will make it easier for the state to then kill you.
Okay, so here's my
Yeah, I can hear you.
Slow down,
Here's my follow-up
counterpoints.
question. By the
Your mic. Slow down a little bit, man, because your mic is kind of cutting out. So, begin
Hello?
again. Begin again.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
It's kind of robot-y, but
I'll work on it. Come back to me. But hold on, let me write down exactly.
I do have a
You guys
question.
talk.
Yeah,
Sure.
I do have a question for him. I mean, the question that I have is that you say that the peaceful protesters, right? If the government is in fact being tyrannical, right, and it's going to do what it's going to do, right? Like Counterpoint said, wouldn't you rather be able to live on your feet than die on your knees, so to speak, right? So the question then becomes is why is it that you would ever, I mean, the first place in the world where gun rights or the ability to possess a weapon that was enshrined in a constitution where the government couldn't take away was here, right? And the only way that we have to be able to protect that is the Constitution, because without it, the government would become tyrannical. So I guess the question at the root of all of this is what persuasion does the government actually have to listen to you if you don't have some type of means to be able to fight back against them, right?
But you
Because
do.
if
Why would they
literally
ever give
have
a
to
fuck?
depend on their generosity, then there's nothing there because they don't feel threatened at all.
It's because the threats that you have are mostly through democratic channels. There's a reason why democracy, back when the founders made it, was 2% of all government polities, right? Today, it's 50%. The vast majority of those states don't have guns protecting them. They don't have guns protecting their civil liberties. What does support democratic power? Strong political parties that demand rights, that like have mass, like basically we're talking about mass action. Mass strikes work. Mass people marching in the streets works. It is statistically in this study likely to achieve the goals that you want of forcing the government to concede, to make like to let your area secede, to force them to change the laws. Virtually every revolution that
But
we've
you
seen,
you
in, like,
literally
Europe-
just took us out of the hypothetical of the government is tyrannical. It's not listening. It's going to do what it's going to do, right? So you just say, oh, we'll just collect up 1 million people in Washington, right? And then everything's going to be okay. It's not like they'll go get big fire
Let's
truck
see.
engines
I
and
think the
spray
study
every-
found that after you hit 3.27% of the population, that would be good enough. So let's just gather up about 11 million people in Washington, and then then we'd be fine.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, so right now what we're really talking about is political efficacy. In SocialismDoneLeft, you can cite statistics going into the debate further, but at the same time, I'm just going to trust you. Okay, I'm going to assume that you're a policy wonk, that you love statistics, that you study them, that you live them, that you breathe them. They're just in your blood. I trust you. Okay, but
Bloody
at the same
stats.
time, okay, yeah, all right. So this is kind of my question because I'm having a problem squaring what you're saying with the rhetoric that's kind of used by the left in order to get more political advocacy. Okay, and I'll try to explain that really briefly. So, you were talking about how peace often aesthetically or from a propagandistic standpoint is often more effective. It can be used by the media in a positive light. It's less likely to be, or it's more likely to be considered by people and less likely to be dismissed. But at the same time, haven't we seen consistent peaceful movements like Occupy Wall Street just kind of die out on their own momentum where they actually didn't achieve anything because nobody gave a fuck, because nobody was actually causing any damage? Whereas with Black Lives Matter or the civil rights movement, there was violence trickled into it. And I'm going to use some lefty rhetoric against you a little bit here, where basically political change is rooted in conflict. So how do you achieve results without conflict? And how do you achieve results without the threat of conflict? That's what I'm not getting here.
Sure. So the basic idea is that so when we look, for example, at if you want to look at the modern Black Lives Matter stuff, most of what they're doing is not shooting people. It's like property damage. Now, you don't need a gun to destroy property, as I think we have learned. If the argument is that you need to threaten people, peaceful, quote unquote, movements can do so if the only threat that we need is property damage. Moreover, the broader point that the articles are trying to raise, I think, is that when you use violence, it makes it easier for the state, for the media to paint you as violent and to repress you, which then has the greatest likelihood of destroying your movement. One of the big differences between Occupy, which had, I want to say 30,000 at most, 10,000 people camped out in an area, and mass movements like those that are in Alexi's domain or whatever, is scope. The scope of the people involved is a huge predictor of movement success.
Okay, but here's my beef. Okay, so the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which I believe occurred in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Okay, the people were motivated to be on side with the government. They were siding with the authoritarian regime. They were siding with the government. And basically what ended up happening as a result is they took their political opponents and they decided that the government is not the authoritarian government that's doing all of these terrible things. We're not your enemy. It's actually the capitalist roaders that are the enemy. It's the people who are sympathetic to capitalism. It's your teacher who talks about the West in a glowing light. It's It's your parents who talk about how authoritarianism is fucked up. It's your neighbor who kind of he sneaks in blue jeans through the black market. Those are the evil people, and we need to slaughter them wholesale, basically resulting in a witch hunt, mass hysteria, the slaughter of 500,000 to a couple million people. And it's like, this is what we're talking about. So you're talking about that we can rely on the power of the mob to hold the people who are in power accountable. But at the same time, what happens when the mob is out of control? What happens when the mob decides that a minority is not worthy of protecting? What happens when it decides that your right to conscience is not something worth protecting? Because these are recent. Sorry, one more rant. These are not centuries old or millennia old examples. These are things that happened shortly before I was born. I was born in an era in which authoritarian communism still existed. So why tempt fate in this?
Sure. So as a contrapositive to that, look at what toppled the Soviet Union. How many guns were involved there?
A lot.
You think a lot of guns were involved there?
I'm so confused.
But what did they do? How did they topple?
Okay. So just I see the confusion. Let me clarify. There was basically a decades-long Cold War in which trillions of dollars were spent, and economic, military, and R&D pressure.
Not the United States toppling it. The Soviet Union was an internal, rising up of the people.
But you're unnecessarily narrowing the argument.
All of that are you the one who's going to promote the lefty conspiracy theory here?
But you're unnecessarily narrowing the argument, because I'm not advocating for 79 million American gun owners to rise up against their government and to purge Washington D.C. I am saying if you have 79 million American gun owners, you will never have to purge Washington D.C. because there will be a balance of power.
So the way this was supposed to go is I was going to say, hey, look, what brought down the Soviet Union? Were there a lot of guns there? And you'd be like, no, because of course the people in the Soviet Union were not very well armed. They did not have a lot of civilian guns, and yet they toppled the government. The example of the mob working with an authoritarian government, if we want to talk about in a communist society, here's one just 10, 20 years later where they did the exact opposite. The argument is not that the mob is good, that big mobs are inherently good. The argument is that peaceful mobs who are aligned with democratic values are your best bet at preserving them. Violent mobs who are aligned with democratic values are less likely to preserve them. That's basically the argument.
But what is this? Seriously, this is one of the most frustrating things about talking to people who value liberalism and democracy. What is this default where you just assume that the entire planet agrees with us that liberalism, democracy, secularism, and all of that kind of shit is just the way to go? There are literally billions of people who prefer theocracy. There are billions of people who prefer authoritarian regimes, or at least they're under the capture of authoritarian regimes. So what is it? Are they just all secret Republicans? Are they secret liberals? Are they secret progressives?
The argument is pretty clear. So even fucking Steven Pinker raised this argument that when people's incomes rise, when people's educations rise, they disproportionately move towards these liberal democratic valuing movements. Part of the reason that we've seen democracy rise and rise and rise and rise is because people's incomes have risen and risen and risen. Their education has risen and risen and risen and risen. Many people. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you please. Sorry, I'm being a dick. You go.
So I'm not trying to say that everyone is an inherent liberal and that if we just gave power to the masses, then everything would be perfect. The argument isn't that democracy always perfect. It's that generally, if in our society we value democracy, the best bet is to have a highly powerful, highly politically motivated, highly politically active populace that is ready to oppose a tyrannical government, not a politically active populace that's ready to oppose it with guns.
Yeah, but I don't think we value democracy.
Why give up the option?
Because adding that option makes it possible for people to engage in violence and makes it possible for the media to paint them as terrorists. The whole point is that how do I put this? It is almost beneficial to not have that choice, because then you're forced into the nonviolent resistance route, which is better at toppling the government in the first place.
CTV, you can go, but I have a point that I'm not going to forget, so I'll just write it down.
No, go ahead, get it out. Okay, get it out.
So okay, this is my sincere problem and my fear when I'm talking to socialists who okay, so I understand the workers seizing the means of production.
I'm not a revolutionary.
What's that? Not
a revolutionary.
Okay, good for you. Love you for it. We can be friends. Handshake through the camera. There we go. All right. So so my problem is when socialists, not real communists, seize power and they have an authoritarian grip on a society. We're talking about Steven Pinker and the promulgation of like democratic norms as a result of the material conditions improving in different societies. Right now, we're basically talking about an authoritarian society that is very likely committing a cultural genocide, if not a literal genocide. We are talking about a populace that is held hostage by a social credit system. We are talking about a populace that basically can't protest their own police out of fear of being blackballed, kidnapped, and murdered. And they don't have whatever this 2 to 4 times mass movement is not going to happen, because the same kind of technology that you're saying is going to be used against me as a partisan who's fighting against the federal government, it's not even an option for them. The second they think about it, the second they post on social media, they're kidnapped, blackballed, and thrown into a river. So they don't even have the ability to resist the cops who are coming to kill them. What the fuck?
I agree. So the question is, let's say all the Chinese people had guns. I genuinely want you to like walk through Chinese people with guns, and then what? What do they do?
The same mass movements that you're talking about, 3 to 11% of the people.
But you just said those mass movements can't happen because the government's going to shut them down before they even start.
But that's the thing. When a government agent is afraid of you, they're not going to come to your house and kidnap you. They're not going to blackball you. You know why an FBI agent probably isn't going to kick down my door?
Okay,
because
so I just want to be clear. So
if a government wants to, just very quickly, I'm sorry, if a government wants to come, they're just going to send a SWAT team. Like, yeah, like
okay,
which they do currently.
As somebody who worked with SWAT team or has worked with SWAT teams, as somebody who has worked with the military, do you know how paranoid we are? Do you know how like this is actually what's really frustrating about this conversation? Do you know how many considerations we put into the possibility of somebody resisting us violently? Do you know how much fear and anxiety and doubt goes into SWAT teams?
But that doesn't stop someone. Like the person who is in charge of like sending the SWAT teams isn't like, well, this guy has a gun, so I guess we just don't go there.
Oh, well, I'm happy to hear that we won Vietnam. I'm also happy to hear that we won in Afghanistan and in Iraq. I'm happy to hear that we won every single counter.
No. To be clear, I want you to no. The victories in these countries. Like Vietnam is like an odd example because this was literally supported by 2 of the largest other countries in the world, right? Like it was just getting backed by like enormous amounts of foreign power. If you want to say that's going to happen in the United States, go ahead. But like that seems very likely. In Afghanistan, right, the Taliban has been pushed back to 10% of their territory. Their victory, if it comes, is only because we stopped fighting. It's literally a political capital reason. Now, your argument could be like, oh, maybe the government won't be willing to use force against its own citizens. We have the Civil War as an example of that. The government was very willing to destroy whole sections of the country to force them to align with government policy.
Okay, fine, but you're also kind of there's a
Taliban
very
contests half the country.
What's that?
Oh no, yeah, what?
A third of the country, maybe a fourth.
Okay, so I forget who it is, but it's basically von Clausewitz who stated that war is politics by other means. So right there, you're basically saying the only reason why the people in Vietnam won was because we got exhausted politically. The only reason why the Taliban will win is because we will exhaust politically. The only reason why
but you know what isn't happening in Syria is Bashar al-Assad getting exhausted. Do these authoritarian governments get exhausted?
He was reduced to 10% of his territory, and if anybody
he kept fighting because
but if anybody had sneezed on Damascus, it would have fallen. Like seriously, and also you're kind of overestimating the competence of the rebels here, because we're talking about specifically, let's go to Syria. So with Syria, we're talking about dickheads who are not used to owning firearms, who are holding rifles. The way they think that they conduct tactics is by just going into the street and blowing rounds down the roadway. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 76 million Americans who are better trained than the United States military.
So this is actually an interesting thing.
Break it to you, but the training and logistics in the civilian sector is actually better than the shit that you get in the military.
Pressing X, but leaving that aside, right?
I can explain it. Not for the average goober what is available to you. Excuse me. Allow me to be more nuanced.
Okay. So the basic idea that like 76 million people are going to participate in this like violent resistance is extremely unlikely. The very fact. So
look, I'm going to pause it right here because I do want to kind of bring us back to the question is should there be any more regulations inside the United States? And we've kind of jumped around a whole bunch of different things, right? Which I think has all been great historical context for this particular discussion. However, with that being said, we do need to try to get somewhere back to this point because what happens anywhere else in the world is not the United States. So United States history is something that I would be wanting to reference here. And what I will say is that the actions at Fort Sumter, right, were just a small action that ultimately ended up getting millions of people, or at least hundreds of thousands, up in arms in order to fight a war, right? So the actions of a few can affect the many in a very real way.
And as a
Yeah,
historical,
and then the government came in and like killed hundred thousands, like what's it, like 300,000 Southern like soldiers. The government was stronger than civilians.
hey, hold on, sock
They
on
imposed
left.
their will.
No,
That's it.
because I am a history nut, so I gotta oppose you real quick, okay? So it's basically the South was kicking the teeth in of the North for the better part of 3 or 4 years
For
because
like
of
tactical
political
general reasons.
Yes, and basically it came down to logistical factors and numerical factors that ended up winning the war. But at the same time, there is a political will argument here, where what ended up winning the war was William Tecumseh Sherman being willing to burn a third of the country nearly unilaterally in order to win the war.
Yeah, and that's my point. Even in a democracy like the United States, when push came to shove, the leader in charge was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." They pulled the trigger. They burned. Like
Okay,
the argument here that like the government's not going to be willing to like fire on to like repress people to force them in line with government policy. These arguments don't seem even very relevant to United States history, much less to like world history.
Yeah, but
I will
don't you
tell
understand that, like,
Sorry,
the
go
other
ahead.
the fundamental difference here, right, is that we're arguing at the federal level, right? And the states are the ones that should have the right to be able to put any type of weapons restrictions in place that you would want to have, right? So instead of arguing at the federal level, what you need to be doing is arguing at the state level with wherever you live. And this is where this conversation becomes extremely nuanced to the states rather than the federal government.
And CTV, I appreciate you trying to get it back to the legalistic argument, but I just have to make like one more point before
Go
we
ahead.
try to get back on track, okay? Here's the thing about it. The United States military and the police officers of the United States, they're not sworn to the dictator of the United States. They're sworn to the Constitution of the United States, of which a subsection of that is the Second Amendment. Most of these people are patriotically educated, whether that's in the boot camps of the military or inside the police departments that they basically go into. They're sworn to uphold these constitutional things. And before you interrupt me, I see you. Yeah, give me one more second, okay? The veterans, the people like myself, the veterans of the military and the veterans of law enforcement, disproportionately by a factor of like 4 to 1, 9 to 1, probably are more pro-gun than you. So what's going to happen when the people who are basically in charge of law enforcement, in charge of the military, in charge of violence, the veterans who basically all have this patriotic education and are sworn to the Constitution of the United States? What happens when a Democratic representative, a Senate, and all that kind of shit get into power, and they say, we're doing an assault weapons ban and we're doing confiscation, and seriously 60 to 70% of the country says, go fuck yourself? Because if that happens,
It's not going to be 60 to 70. First off, like you could just look at the polls on that one, but
60 to 70% of the people who are actively engaged in and trained in violence tell them to go fuck themselves.
I mean, so
I think it'd be
This is-
closer to 80%, honestly.
this is an interesting argument. So when we look at like, say, like the Cultural Revolution, I just wanted to make another comparison. The Cultural Revolution, people were entirely willing to work with an authoritarian government. Let's say a Republican comes into office and that Republican is a little bit fascist and they start to do a little bit of those fascist things. And all of the people in the military keep working with them. And a lot of people in the countryside, those 50%, those Republicans who disproportionately own those guns, they continue to work with them. This argument that like guns inherently present a protection only works if those people with guns are consistently committed to democratic values. This argument doesn't seem like it's going to hold as strong if you have a extremely partisan political situation where you can have people with guns fighting in paramilitary groups to try and gain power. We're seeing that increasingly with right-wing paramilitary groups, and we're starting to see the beginning edge maybe on the left. So I'm not sure that this argument is actually very strong. There was paramilitary fighting in Austria before the fascists took over. There was paramilitary fighting in Germany before like the Nazis took over. This argument that like merely having guns, merely having fighting is just simply not sufficient to maintain freedom. No.
Okay, you're okay. Let me give you an olive branch. It's not sufficient. You're correct.
You're cutting out.
You know what it needs. Sorry. What about now? Hello.
Better?
Hello.
You sound better. Okay, continue.
I think it's good.
Okay. So you're right. It's not sufficient. What would be sufficient is civics education. What would be sufficient is educating people about democracy.
Could you give me a
educating
second?
people about the republic.
We have a problem. Video just disappeared.
Yeah, it literally did off the screen.
Yeah, give me a second.
I was actually getting ready to
Yeah.
refresh.
Give me a second.
I was gonna tell you if you. I saw chat was like saying FFF.
I don't know why it disappeared. Give me a second.
I'm gonna try refreshing. And see
There
if that
we
doesn't
go.
bring it back
There
up
we
for
go.
me.
It's better. Okay, continue.
I'm dragging all you guys down. So okay, so what would be sufficient is civics education. What would be sufficient is basically educating people about republicanism, democracy, the
But
limited
we do all
government.
this.
No, we don't. No,
What,
we.
what do you
don't.
think that we do in high school? Do you think that they never mention like what democracy is? Do they forget?
Yeah, I
like,
think that they definitely
Yeah,
tell
I
you a
think our
watered down version of it, and they don't bother teaching you what you
Garbage.
actually need to know.
Yeah, I think our civics education is garbage. It is
Garbage.
terrible.
Garbage.
okay.
Absolute fucking
This
garbage.
just feels like
I've-
one of those
I've-
things where like, oh,
I
I'm just
have
going to hate
learned-
on like the current educational paradigm, but like, what concrete proposal
no.
are you talking about
Yeah,
that
but-
would be a change?
Yeah, but Stockton, here's the deal, right?
Mhm.
I am 37 years old. I have gotten more education in civics since I left high school of a better quality than what I received when I was in high school. So the problem, it very much so is education, because the education that you should be receiving should cover a hell of a lot more than just, okay, we have the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and they do their stuff and go out into the world and find a job and become a consumer, which is exactly what we have now. They teach kids how to be consumers rather than patriots.
Okay.
And-
So here's the thing, right? There are multiple things that you can look at that would fix this problem, that would fix the problem, or like would drastically reduce the problems that come with gun violence, right? Back on the topic of gun
Yes.
violence.
I'm
You know,
ready to go back. Sock down
Yeah.
left. We can
Okay.
do this
Great.
another time.
On the topic of gun violence, you can fix infrastructure. You can improve the quality of like households. You can, get better job and workforces. You can have better protections for people. Like it's going to be pretty hard for you to want to fucking burglar someone if you have all of your needs taken care of. Okay.
Right.
Having better education, access to healthcare, all of these things would mental health care, all of these things would drastically improve the quality of life for most people. And anyone who felt compelled, not out of some sadistic sense that they want to go and hurt people, but they're doing it whether to survive or because they're mentally ill or whatever, just doing these things would drastically improve their lives, right? But these things are really hard to implement. They take 10 or like maybe 20 years to implement well, okay? It takes a long time for us to put them in and for them to actually operate and work well. We have been working on implementing a good system of math for years now. Like, it is insane how bad math education is in the United States. It's actually hilarious because professors across, the fucking Atlantic and Pacific Ocean will come here and be like, what the fuck are you guys doing? No wonder everyone hates math here. You guys aren't teaching it right. You're teaching it like it's a history class instead of a math class. We have so many fucking problems with our current system. But you know what you can implement almost overnight? Good gun control. These are Band-Aid fixes because we can't fucking fix this other shit. When I say overnight, I mean in the course of like a year.
So the way that I
it would take even longer for you to even be able to think about trying to implement that, because then if you implement a magazine restriction, now you got to try to find all these magazines that are out running around the country. You literally got to go door to door to collect these things for people because they're not going to come bring them in, right?
This
I'm
is
talking
why
about-
the most
wait, wait,
effective
so
gun
wait.
control is supply side. Instead of trying to make the consumers all give their stuff back, you just
And that's
restrict the
exactly why
supply
we
of
had a
guns
case
out.
that went to the Supreme Court that ruled that you couldn't go after gun manufacturing because it's inherently tied to the right to be able to own a firearm.
Sure, I think
And
the Supreme
then-
Court ruling. I think that you can have greater restrictions on the firearms and still have a reasonable right to own guns. I think that ruling is wrong.
It's in the same way that we have the
I guess
right
maybe
to.
that's where the difference in opinion comes in, because I don't believe that there's a conversation for reasonable. I don't.
Wait. So you have the right
modern
to
Supreme
go
Court's
and
idea
buy.
of gun rights was literally invented in 1990. Like
Okay.
we reversed an enormous amount of precedent.
Hey,
Come on, man.
Give
I've
me
talked to
wait,
Pisco
give me
too,
give me
Sock
give me a
down
moment.
left.
Give me a moment.
Like, come on.
Can we let Denims talk? Okay.
You have the right to buy and own a car and drive your car. You do not have the right to drink and drive. Okay? That is not protected for
I
you to
am so
drink and
confused
drive.
as to how that's relevant.
In the
Well,
same
and-
sense, you have the right to own specific, like we have specific rights. We don't have these broad rights that we just apply everywhere. You have the right to own a gun. You have the right to do these things with specific restrictions.
Okay, so I'm not of the unlimited
Mm-mm.
unlimited freedom thing. I think CTV and I might differ a little bit on what we think the reasonable line is for what private firearms ownership should be. But the reason why your parallel doesn't quite
At a
work
federal level?
Well, hold on, bud. The reason why your parallel doesn't quite work is because the right to own a car doesn't exist. Maybe the right to travel does. And then some of these things are privileges and all that kind of shit. And then also there are laws against, like you were talking about, basically using a car incorrectly, being drunk. Generally speaking, and most states, there are laws against, operating firearms while intoxicated or in a negligent manner. So these parallels aren't quite one for one, but I know what you're saying.
Sure, it's not a perfect analogy. There's no such thing as like a perfect analogy. But yeah,
but this is where, like, I swear to God. So we were talking a little bit earlier before the show. It's like, Connor, you seem so progressive. You seem so rational, like all that kind of bullshit. It's like, because I am 100% with you on solving material conditions. I'm 100% with you on making a better society, making better education, creating equality of opportunity in order to reduce crime. But what I'm not interested in is having a shitty society that we don't support, that we then take laws and we're like, oh, well, what we'll do is we'll just throw fucking duct tape on this bitch because we can't educate our citizens worth a fuck. They're stupid as fuck. They don't understand civics. They don't understand history. They don't understand mathematics. So let's just make freedom illegal because they're too stupid to exercise it. I am not interested in living in that society.
So I feel like there's a framing thing. So for me, guns are a force multiplier. They're a violence multiplier. They make crimes that would have been like just an injury into a death. They make like crimes that might have just been someone holding you up with a knife into someone shooting you. There's an enormous increase of like injuries and violence that is correlated with guns. The idea is that, yes, we could drive down the violence rate underlying all of these things. Fewer people doing crimes does mean fewer gun crimes as well. We can also attack it from the gun side. We can do both at once. This is not like an either or, because guns are a multiplier of the underlying problems.
But you and I don't agree on whether or not the utilitarian calculus for maintaining a stable society. Sorry. Hello?
Yeah, you're working now.
Yeah, okay. You're good now.
You and I don't agree on whether or not the utilitarian calculus for a free society involves the private right to keep and bear arms. We don't agree.
Well, so in the very, like, if you want Soc Done Left's like 2200 year plan, sure, no guns. If you want Soc Done Left's like 2040 plan, it's like a very small restriction on guns. It's like permits, it's safes, it's waiting periods. That's pretty much it. Like, those are the main ones.
Yeah, and I would be against that at every single marker. Every single marker. You're not going to come into my house and tell me how to store my gun, right? You're not going to come into my house and tell me how to do a fucking thing in it. Why? Because it's fucking mine. It's mine. It's not yours. Stay the fuck out of my house. It's that simple, right? Sure, and I would tell the government the exact same fucking thing.
Let me ask you a question. Socialism done left. Socialism done left quick. Is that gun his?
or is it ours?
Is it his? Is it his?
Is it our gun?
Well, after 2200,
defeated
it
once
will be
again.
the people's gun, and more importantly, the people's melted down slag. Okay.
True.
Fuck.
So the suggestion that I have, right? I do agree that I think if this is like an enforcement thing, I don't want police officers to have an additional duty, right? The drug war enormously increased like the role of police in having to do all these drug things. That reduced their ability to do other like police work. That reduced their ability to be effective in their communities. I don't want police to like be doing house searches to make sure you've got a safe and that your gun is in it. That's probably not very effective. For me, the most important things are supply side. It's make sure someone has a safe in their first place before they have the gun, because most of the time they'll probably end up using it. Make sure they've got the permit. Make sure they've had to wait 30 days. That's those kind of things.
Can I help you really quick? Because I really feel like I have a solution that would help you perform the tasks that you are set out to do without stepping on CTV's toes. Okay. So
teach me how to dance.
Yes. Okay. So CTV's primary concern is that he should be able to do whatever he wants within his curtilage, within his, his dwelling. He should be able to have a fucking crossbow by his fucking bed while he's doing shots of Southern Comfort and lime, I hope, or something else.
And smoking a bowl. Don't forget.
Like he should be able to basically do what he wants. What you could do instead of you could basically have the legal requirement of you should own a safe and you should keep your firearms stored. If you choose to not store your firearms and a crime is committed with your firearms, then at that point you are civilly liable for whatever has occurred as a result of you not following the safe storage law.
Yes, no, this is precisely the direction I was going to go. It's potentially holding people liable for like the theft of those like dangerous items, more or less, is the way to go. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the argument is that this is best paired with a sort of permit system, because then you've better ideas of who owns a gun and where and so on.
The only reason why I want to caveat this, because I've been a cop who has investigated burglaries with firearms that basically these people are already violated. The crime has been committed against them.
Yes,
so you don't want to accuse
secondarily
them of a
violated.
crime. Yeah, and then I'm going to violate them for being stupid. If you were talking about a civil fine for allowing a firearm to be loosed into the public, that I think could pass. But if you were literally talking about, hey, Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry your house was burglarized, but you allowed your pistol to stay on your, in your kitchen cupboard. It was stolen. Please turn around, put your hands behind your back. I'm taking you to jail right now. That's probably not going to fly.
No, almost certainly this would have to be a civil thing, and I'm very much thinking fines. Generally, I try to think about things. This might sound. I try to come at things from a libertarian perspective. I want the government to be as small as possible. Now, unfortunately, as a socialist, I recognize that the government needs to be enormous. So I would like the cops to have the smallest administrative burden necessary. I would like them to have the smallest enforcement burden necessary. I don't want them to have to arrest people who violate these minor infractions. I want ideally civil sort of fine bureaucratic functions.
Okay. And Denims, this is where I promise you, if SocialismDoneLeft didn't come with stats, and if he wasn't as articulate as he was, this very easily could have been a screaming match.
Oh yeah. This has been actually a very polite debate table.
Sorry, Dylan.
Yeah, sorry, not enough content for you. Sorry.
It's all good. But we are gonna have to start wrapping this up now.
Dylan's got the big guns coming in, right?
Yep, we got the main event coming up next. Two
I
people who do not like each other.
I was about to say, I have a feeling Redneck and Demon Mama will make up for the civilness in this.
No, they will. They will. All of the mudslinging has been saved. And also, CTV, I have a personal question I wanted to ask you before I let everybody finish these statements. I wanted to ask you what you thought about the historic. I know you really hate the drug war. You talk about it all the time. How much you despise it. The historic House vote to decriminalize cannabis and erase nonviolent federal marijuana convictions. What did you think about that?
I think that sounds pretty fucking based.
Did you hear about the vote for it, though? Who voted for it and who didn't?
Honestly, I've been in IT school today, so I haven't been able to really catch up on stuff. So
I'll tell you the Democrat and Republican votes. 222 Democrats voted for it. 6 voted against it. 5 Republicans voted for it. 158 voted against it.
What's that, 3-1?
So basically, the vast majority of the Republican Party tried to stop the decriminalization of marijuana.
So clearly, I'm still fighting the right. Got it.
Yeah, it looks like you were one of the five.
Changed. I mean, I've said that thing since day one, right? I always fight conservatives when it comes to the drug thing because, that's what it was socked on, right? You fucking said that you understand that the government needs to be fucking big, right? Do you not understand that there's an inherent cost with that? And that we see the inflation that happens with our fucking currency, and then the fucking, everything fucking blows up because you have big, huge fucking government, right? And then the value of the currency is devalued to a point where it doesn't fucking mean anything. Then, hold on, and then the schools just go teaching consumerism. So then all we just have is people just fucking eating up all this shit. The currency's gone to shit. The government fucking explodes. And then guess what? You don't have a fucking country. And then you have to start over again. And you better fucking hope that you got your Second Amendment rights, because if you don't, then the government's going to come, or anybody else when the fucking shit comes. The tribal gangs that come are going to fucking come and take your shit. So you better hope you got your guns. You better hope it. So Dylan, I hope that was some good content for you. You said it got kind of boring, so I wanted to bring it.
I did want to mention, Dylan, did you see that Oregon passed its bill to decriminalize or in some way deschedule or something all of their drugs?
I love that. That's fucking wonderful. I'm a huge fan of that. As somebody somebody who's personally felt the effect of drug abuse in my own family. I lost my mom to drug abuse, and I know that doing that would have allowed her to get the type of help in other institutions if she knew that going up to an officer and asking for help when she was a homeless resident in D.C. wouldn't have led with, please put your arms behind your back.
Yep.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting, Portugal is the model that countries look to for this. And there's stats on what police do in Portugal. They did it after they demolished their dictatorship with a peaceful mass mobilization, by the way, in the Rose Revolution or the Carnation Revolution, one of those. Anyway, aside from that, they went down this path, and the police do, I want to say, I want to say it's 8,000 convictions, but I'm not sure what the actual word, like, the point is, it went from like 20% drug, 80% everything else, to now it's like 10% drug, 90% everything else. There's an enormous increased ability of the police to actually do police work, to get back to like community policing when they aren't doing the drug war. So if you want to talk about like building a safer community where people are less worried about themselves, building back to a community policing where police don't need to do these basically worthless arrests is an enormous step in the right direction.
I tell you what, since Counterpoint said earlier, one of those things about, things that make CTV go, maybe you're not being serious, right? It's when you reference Portugal, right? You are aware that Portugal actually started the Atlantic slave trade, right?
And it ended the drug war. So I think that's probably like morally equivalent, right?
No, not really. I don't think that's morally equivalent at all.
I'm gonna cast a guess, okay? And I might be wrong on this one. I'm pretty sure the people who ended the drug war are not the same ones who did the slave trade. I'm not sure though. Any thoughts?
There's a conversation. There's a conversation.
Appreciate you all coming by. If you would all like to shout out your channels quick before I start starting the next part of the show, I'll go around the room. Denims, where can people find you?
Twitch.tv/Denims. SocDem. I stream every single day at 6 a.m. PST. And yeah, that's about it.
Wonderful. Socialism Done Left.
Left.
I am Aiden. I run Socialism Done Left. You can find me on YouTube or Twitch, and you can also find me if you search Georgia Register to Vote December 7th, final day to vote to give Democrats control and pass climate legislation. Everyone, December 7th, Georgia Register to Vote. That's the best way to find me.
I know everybody hates polling, but new polling came out, and Ossoff and Warnock were leading.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's within the margin of error.
Ossoff 1 point, Warnock by 2.5 points.
Yeah, that's within the margin, but
Yeah.
still exciting.
Yeah. Warnock definitely exciting. That's getting bigger numbers.
Yeah, and Georgia polls weren't even that far off, so
True.
hopium.
CTV.
You can find me at twitch.tv/critically thinking veteran. Or on Twitch at original_CTV. If I don't know you, and if you know that you're being a little edgy, right, I'm probably going to be a smartass. I'm just going to be honest, right? If I know you and I try to be genuine with you, and you come back and you're a smartass, I'm probably going to shit down your fucking neck, right? So it's like, weigh carefully which side of CTV you'd like, because I want to be genuine and nice to everybody, but there are some assholes out there, right? And what I find to be the underlying thing of most people is they take my kindness for weakness, and well, that's just not going to be it. So
CTV, for someone who hates big government, you sure do rule with an iron fist. You gonna go over the counterpoints?
You see how well the dogs act. So
counterpoints.
Yeah, my name's Connor. I have a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. If you want to hate subscribe to me or love subscribe to me, I don't really care. I'll take either one of them. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at ConnorPoints, CONORPOINTS, CONORPOINTS. Thanks for having me, Dylan. Very sincerely appreciate it. I wish you luck in the shit show to come.
Thank you. Did you all enjoy this type of format too, like the
I
card
loved it.
type format?
yeah, it was great. I loved it.